Hello. May I just ask you please to take your seats so we can get started? It's my particular honor now to host a discussion of the international stakeholders in the transport system. We have a panel of what we think of as heavy hitters, a sample of global players whom we would like to call up on stage to talk about what their various sectors are doing to reduce oil dependence, to improve energy efficiency, and to mitigate carbon emissions. And we look forward to having comment from all of you at the end of this session because you are all, of course, stakeholders in the international transport system. So we will be saving time for focused questions and statements at the end. And now may I please invite to the stage the FIA, the International Motoring Clubs, represented by Susan Pikralidas, who is the Secretary General. Susan, if you would take the outside chair there. Thank you very much. The FIATA, which is the Freight Forwarders and Logistics Association, represented by Mr. Heiner Rogge, who is the Vice President. And we have the International Maritime Community, represented by the IMO, and Miguel Palomares, who is the Director of the Environment. The OICA, representing car manufacturers, and speaking for them will be Yves van der Straten, who is Secretary General. And finally, we have the UIC, representing the International Railway Community, and Luc Aladiadière is the Secretary General of the organization. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Rogge, we heard a great deal of talk yesterday about the hard-pressed aviation industry and the pain they're feeling, but I guess your own members must be feeling some too.
Yes, of course, we are suffering in the increase of fuel prices, of course, but to avoid a misunderstanding, I'm not representing the transport industry on the road. Freight forwarder is not a road haulier, and what you see on the roads are most our subcontracting partners. Most of all, we organize the supply chain and we use every mean of transport. Only to give a short information, our members organize and operate also the big container fleets in the inland navigation on the Rhine. These are freight forwarders. And my organization in Germany was one of the founding organizations of the biggest combined transport operator in Europe, Comiverkehr. And we are still a shareholder. Therefore, we are engaged in every mean of transport. And what we are doing is to optimize the supply chain and to use alternatives if there is capacity available and if these alternatives are really reliable. On the short end of the story, of course, we have the necessity to reduce fuel consumption. We do it also actually in improving by driver training what we can do in the short run. But we are waiting also for better solutions by the industry. Only to give a short information to the audience, we started 1 year and a half in Europe with the Euro 5 emission standard for heavy trucks. And the market share by 2 incentives in my country, in Germany, is nowadays 30%. Therefore, this demonstrates if there are technical solutions, we do our investment very promptly to have the best solution we can offer to our members and also to our customers.
To what extent are you seeing companies shifting their logistics and supply chain structures as a response to soaring fuel prices?
Actually, it's not the case. For all, if you speak about consumer goods, they are not so affected. If you break it down to a product, the transport cost of a consumer product is not so important, actually. Therefore, we spoke about this yesterday. The import of televisions coming out of China or Korea will take place also in the future, because even if you triple the transport cost of a 40-foot container, regarding the price of the product of a television equipment coming out of these countries will even be not so important. Therefore, logistic chain in this regard won't change at present.
Thank you. I want to come back to that point a little later in the discussion. But let's turn now to the railways and ask, if we do see shifts from one form of transport to another, how prepared are the railways to handle that? Do you have the capacity on the freight side?
I would say that, yes, we see very positive results on the way. You know, for a very long time, the railways were state-owned, monopolistic, and so on, and not enough market-oriented. I think really that since now 10, 15 years, this has very much changed, especially in Europe, but also in North America further, and in Japan and different countries. Things is on the way now. The railways are really market-oriented and thinking business. After that, after having said that, this was one of the job to be done by the railways themselves, to focus on the business rather than on an administrative task which could be given by the state. Now we have a lot of successful experiences that we can share in Europe and outside Europe, and there are both conditions for freight markets. We could also speak about passengers, but let us concentrate on freight business.
But passengers is really where the railways make most of their money, isn't it?
Yeah, this is clear. But one of the main challenges for freight, and what are the success conditions for freight development and shifting the goods from some other modes to the rail, or sharing the goods, I would say, because I think that we should think certainly more in terms of sharing the goods and bringing the best service to the customers rather than only competing. Okay, but we cannot both compete and complement each other's the different modes. The two main conditions are very easy to understand and not so easy to do. The first one is to think obviously international, especially in Europe where the countries are very small. Some countries in some areas are very small. The domestic market is not the good one, and we have to think international and second step global. When you look at one of the most successful stories in the freight is DB Schenker experience. They have really thought global, bringing their activity towards the harbors, to Rotterdam with the Netherlands, to the Scandinavia Peninsula, and now bringing and building some business with Russia, China, and so on. So this is the first thing. The second thing is to think not only rail transport, but of course logistic chain, and to put the rail transport within the logistic chain. And for a long time, I feel that some railways thought that they were logisticians by themselves, and this is in our mind now, with experience, a mistake. They can be a major actor of the logistic chain, but they are not spontaneously able to do the logistic service to the customers. So when it's possible to think global, at least international, and secondly to think logistic, there is some success possible. But it costs. It costs. This is one first thing to be solved, and cost not only for the railway undertaking activity, but also for the infrastructure. And this is a policy which is under the state and the government's responsibility. Infrastructure are state-owned and will stay state-owned, even if they are managed in other ways. And no need to say what happened in the UK when it tried to be managed as a private ownership. I don't think it was a good experience. So back to the public policy. The states have to do their job in this field of the infrastructure, even if it is managed by a private or not private company. The second thing, which is absolutely essential, is really to overpass these international regulations and so on. If you want to carry goods from China to Europe, this is something which is not so much a complicated technology or a technical issue. It is mainly an administrative one. It's why DB is testing to put different goods in the trains, in the containers who are carried between Beijing and Hamburg in the train in order to see whether it's easier to cross the borders with some goods rather than some others. We have to be pragmatic, and in this way I feel that intergovernmental organizations like UN, United Nations, can be very useful to help to solve these problems, because we have to do our job with technical matters, with behaviors of our companies and our staffs, but we have also to cross the borders, and to cross the borders is not something which is only technical, it's also administrative and customs and so on. And it appears that it's not so easy when you go by the inland way. But to answer to your question, yes, there are very good answers of the market when we succeed with some conditions, but it's very ambitious.
Let's go now straight to an international body and ask whether in the maritime industry, if we talk about shifting, optimizing transport patterns in order to reduce carbon, shipping might be a logical choice. Yet, in fact, there's a trade-off there, isn't there? Because, in fact, your ships may have a lower carbon footprint, but they're often highly polluting.
Well, it is very sad, first of all, that a label of dirty has been hanged to shipping, considering that it moves over 90% of world trade, that 99.99% of goods arrive safely and with due respect to the environment from the start to finish. And nevertheless, a single pollution incident or the fact that ships currently burn high sulfur fuels does or give rise to this label, which is, in my opinion, totally unjustified. Shipping has a lot to do in the current atmosphere of protecting the environment in general and the atmospheric environment in particular. The IMO is working on a two-path, parallel but separated path in addressing these issues. One is the getting rid of air pollutants as much as possible. The second is minimizing the effects of shipping on the global warming. I will address the first issue first. Ever since 1997, we've had global mandatory regulations that set limits for sulfur and also set limits for emission of nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, and ozone-depleting substances, which are totally prohibited on board. 5 or 6 years ago, it was realized that it wasn't enough. And we started working very hard with full cooperation from industry and other sectors to tighten the regulations in the MARPOL Convention. This has been achieved this year. There was consensus in April among 100 member states, members of IMO, and the regulations on air emissions have been tightened to a great extent. They will be introduced in a progressive manner, which is dictated by the availability of the fuel that will be required, and will culminate in 2020 when the sulfur contents of fuel burned by ships in international trade will be reduced to 500 parts per million. That is 0.5%. And this means diesel oil.
So is this an approach that you could and would possibly apply to carbon dioxide reduction?
Well, we are very much encouraged by the success in tightening air pollution regulations. And we are currently, as I speak even, working very, very hard, also with full cooperation from industry, in trying to address greenhouse gas emissions. We have set a target to July of next year to come up with a global regulatory network where some provisions will be introduced in a mandatory instrument in order to minimize and reduce as much as possible greenhouse gas emissions from ships. We have to also bear in mind that we are in a quandary here. The maritime transport is not growing by choice of the maritime industry. The growth in shipping is dictated by world trade. So we either stop or reduce world trade, and then it will not need so many ships, or we continue growing and doing our utmost to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which, by the way, as everybody knows, is a function of the amount of fuel you burn through a variety of measures. And that could be technical, operational, or market-based. I mean, we are not discarding anything at all. The horizon is wide and open.
Mr. van der Straten, when we talk about trade-offs for policy makers, is one of the trade-offs in the auto industry between safety and carbon dioxide reduction? Is a car that produces less CO2 also a less safe car?
Well, yes and no, but this is, I would say, one of the many technical challenges we are facing. There is indeed an inherent technical contradiction between environmental issues and safety issues. We have seen that over the last few years with ever-increasing safety requirements on motor vehicles, an increasing weight. And there is simply no other technical solution to that unless you use quite expensive lightweight materials, and a lot of research is ongoing in this respect as well. But again, there is a price to pay. There are even inherent contradictions between when we come to exhaust emissions, pollutants in terms of CO, NOx, etc., and fuel consumption. That is simply due to the internal combustion process. In order to reduce the fuel consumption, the obvious way, of course, is to increase the combustion temperature, to increase the efficiency of the engine. But then in turn you increase the NOx emissions. So then we have to install NOx converters in order to again offset that. But for these NOx converters we need high quality fuels, very low sulfur. And that comes then to a second challenge, is really the quality of the fuel, which is an enormous challenge that we are faced with. A lot has been done in the developed countries, but a lot has still to be done in other countries. And in this respect, I certainly welcome the starting activities in the United Nations in the World Forum that was presented earlier on by Mr. Marek, where some activities are really in the pipeline now, by way of speaking, talking about fuel, to try to improve also in the developing countries the available fuel on the market. Another enormous challenge that we are faced with, and that has been, I think, a little bit overlooked over the last few days, is really the timing. We are doing an enormous investment in terms of research and development. To give you a figure, manufacturers are investing worldwide about 85 billion euros every year in research and development. And quite a large part of that is devoted to the environmental questions. 85 billion euro. But once again, in spite of all these investments, we have to realize that we need time to develop, design, build vehicles, not even mentioning the certification procedures, which can be sometimes very long. So typically for a classical vehicle, we need a total lead time of 5 to 7 years. That's a typical time, but that is for a known technology. When we are talking about future technologies, which are still in the development stage, we are talking about much longer time frames. And that makes it another challenge that we are faced with. And that brings me also to the issue of, regardless of new technologies you bring gradually on the market, it takes time to develop them, but it also takes time to put them on the market and to replace the existing fleet. And I think not very much was said in the last 2 days about that. Typically, even in a developed country, it takes minimum 15 years to replace the car fleet by newer, more efficient ones. So that has to be taken into account as well. So if we want to really have some progress and success in the CO2 issue, we also have to tackle the existing vehicles on the road, not only awaiting until new technologies come on the market. We really have to also look at the existing fleet. And for there as well, of course, governments have a key role to play, certainly in terms of traffic management. And that can be sometimes very, very simple measures. To give you one example, I have a study which was done in the US quite recently, estimating that over the next 20 years, by relieving the, I think if I remember well, 230 or 233 worst traffic bottlenecks in the US alone, there is a potential saving of 400 million tonnes of CO2 over 20 years. So on average, 20 million tonnes per year, which is a fantastic result. And there have been other studies in Japan and so on which come to very similar conclusions. So there is definitely something that can and should be done there. And it is not necessarily the question of big investments. Sometimes you can have very easy, very cheap measures, thinking of simply synchronizing traffic lights. I personally experience that every day, starting off from one green light, and 50 meters later I have the next traffic light turning red at the time I arrive there, unless I accelerate like hell. This is ridiculous. There are really plenty of little examples like that, and last but not least, also to tackle the existing fleet is the eco-driving. There is a stand outside there on eco-driving, and I can only stress the importance of that. There has been an IEA-ITF workshop, if I remember well, in November 2007, concluding that by simple eco-driving tips, you could save 10% of your fuel consumption. And I think there as well, consumers are not sufficiently aware of these, the potential fuel reduction they have. And there I think we need also a close cooperation, but also, I guess, with the motoring clubs like FIA, to really promote eco-driving, because that will help us a lot achieving CO2 goals. So all in all, because of all these challenges that we are faced with, that's why we strongly promote the so-called integrated approach, which was also presented yesterday by Ivan Hodac for the European manufacturers, and that we at global level very strongly support. That means really coherence, pragmatism, and stability in the fiscal and political environment. As Mr. Mandel said this morning, we cannot afford having changing policies every year. We have to know from the start that we are doing the right thing.
Susan Pikalidas, in terms of behavioral change, we heard some discussion yesterday about kilometer usage taxes as a way to get drivers simply to leave their cars in the garage. Is driving a wedge between car ownership and use a desirable and feasible behavioral change?
FIA actually has a policy on taxation of kilometers. But before I get to that, I thought it might be helpful just to sort of explain where we come from in terms of developing our policy. FIA is probably most known as the governing body for motorsport, but it also is the International Organization for Motoring and Touring Clubs. And so the members of FIA's affiliated clubs are motorists. So the policies that we take and the things that we do are in the interest of looking after our members, which are motorists. FIA's policy actually prefers taxing use rather than vehicle ownership. And we believe that for two reasons in particular. One is that it is more controllable. You can control your use of the car. You can make choices. You can decide to drive or not to drive. You can decide to make a shorter trip or a longer trip. A tax on the vehicle is less controllable. And also I would add that we've heard a lot over the last few days excuse me, about the cost of these new technologies and the price that they will add to the cost of a car, at least initially, until maybe the scale will reduce the price. And so if we're asking motorists to choose to buy fuel-efficient and less polluting cars, which is a good thing to do and which we would encourage, we have to realize that the cost of that technology is already almost a bit of a tax on car ownership. And so what we think is more appropriate and more fair and probably more effective is to tax use rather than car ownership.
Is that potentially a solution for the dilemma we talk about so often? Every Chinese and Indian citizen wanting to have a car?
I think it's difficult to really get into the reasons why people want a car. I mean, there are probably a lot of different reasons. It may be that you need to transport goods. You may need to transport your family. You may need access to health care. You may need access to a job. There are a lot of reasons why people in all countries, developing or not, or industrialized, may think personal transportation is better for what they do. I think the challenge we have is not necessarily to say owning a car is the bad thing to do. There is absolutely no useful reason for owning a car. I don't think that's true. What I think we need to do, as has been talked about at length at this conference, and I think correctly, is that we need to provide a lot of different options for people, and we need to provide options that work, alternative options that work. If we do recognize that car ownership and car driving will remain, we need to make sure that it is clean. We need to make sure that it is sustainable, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure supports useful and sustainable car transport.
Mr. Woga, let's talk a bit more about the implications for emerging economies from some of what we've discussed here. You said earlier televisions will continue to be assembled in China and India and transported back to industrial economies. But we heard the Norwegian minister say, for example, that perhaps we don't need to be transporting food from one end of the globe to another. Is that correct? Are we going to see shifts in different commodities?
Well, maybe or maybe not, but this is depending on the consumer. If he likes apples coming out of South Africa, or if you like meat coming out of New Zealand, and I learned that transporting meat out of New Zealand is even more efficient and CO2 reducing, comparing this with the production in Great Britain. Therefore, it's depending what are the real circumstances and, of course, what is the consumer really demanding. But allow me to make two comments to Mr. Alladier and Mr. van der Straten. Concerning the rail, I think I made clear that we as freight forwarders would improve our activities on the rail today and also tomorrow, and we did it in the past. But what we need, these are reliable services. And this has nothing to do with administrative procedures. Maybe these are internal procedures between the railway companies, but in the European single market, all the bottlenecks at the borders for the road disappeared overnight. But this was not the case in the rail. And this is also a question of organization. You can overcome all the different functions by rail also within 15 minutes if you are organized very properly. To make this clear, this is an argument which I can't accept. And if we can achieve that the reliability of high-value trains in Europe is more than 95%, and if we organize our networks on the road, Europe-wide, with a reliability of 99%, then you must do it also in the same way. Then we can improve our activities directly with the railway transportation. And a second element, one of the biggest markets in Europe, the rail neglected totally in the last 20 years. This is the market of fruit and vegetables, meat and fish, and all temperature-controlled products as chemicals. And this is a tremendous market share comparing the rest of the goods we have to transport in Europe and also in other parts of the world. And this kind of transport and on the rail don't take place because there is no equipment at all for this. This is a shortcoming which we should overcome directly. And one thing to Mr. van der Straten concerning emission standards, we discussed it yesterday also, concerning freight and our trucks, our heavy trucks. I always have the impression that the manufacturers have 3 or 4 aces in their pockets. And when we introduced the Euro 4 standards in Europe, the Euro 5 standards were available directly. Then you say Euro 6 is only available in 2012 or 13, then you are surprised, look into a newspaper that one of your manufacturers said, well, this is maybe the case for one of my competitors, but others are quicker and can do it directly even today. Therefore, we like as industry not to be the bad boys, but we like to invest in the best equipment we can get.
Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, just to say that when I spoke about administrative barriers at the borders, I was speaking not a European approach, and as I understood, we have been requested to speak not only Europe, but also global. It's clear
because
that
we talked a great deal about a single European sky. What about single European rails? Let's just briefly stay with it.
It's still on the way and not achieved, but we have solved many problems, but also we come from a period where railways were national, industry were national, and of course the standards were very national. And we are on the way of setting up interoperability concepts, and it takes time. The railways are on the way. They agreed for the single control command system and regulations and different things. It takes time, I must say. You're right. You need reliable services. This is clear. The European railways know perfectly. It's why the way some railways extended their action range to other countries and manage the traffic in a European way is the only clear method. But we have also to develop more long-distance services with Asia, and there is still a lot of things to be done between China and Mongolia, between Mongolia and Russia, between Russia and so on. And this is something which is taking time, and for which we need some support from United Nations to help to facilitate that. But in Europe, I agree with you. We are doing what we can. The market is following, more or less. Not so bad, but not perfectly. This is clear. We have still a lot of things to do. And we also are improving our performance in CO2 emissions. And we are now committed commonly in Europe to decrease our CO2 emission by 30% between 1990 and 2020 in order to bring this added value that we have already at a good level and that we really think we should improve equally as the other transport modes. But, okay, that's a challenge, and we are trusting that we will succeed.
Mr. van der Straten, do you have a comment? And perhaps I can add to the remarks that we heard from Mr. Wager the question, how do we keep standards from becoming caps on innovation rather than springboards?
Well, first of all, to answer Mr. Roger, the fact that some manufacturers sometimes are able to do better and quicker than foreseen by the regulation, that shows that they can be innovative. And that it's also is really a sign of how competitive this motor vehicle industry is. The internal competition is extremely strong, and definitely it's a continuous fight to really survive. That may sometimes create trouble, that is true, but on the other hand, it really promotes innovation, it promotes technical development, and I see really a regulation as being a common platform for the whole of industry, with then leaving the necessary methodology or technology up to the manufacturers. And that really comes to that issue that you raise. That is indeed quite an interesting debate we are faced with very often, whether it is in terms of emissions, whether it is in terms of safety or whatever, is that in any case regulations must avoid dictating specific technologies, because that is the worst thing you can do in a competitive market, because you simply break, destroy all innovative spirit. What I want a regulation to be is really to tell us very clearly, Mr. Manufacturer, within so many years, I want you to produce vehicles which perform in this way. And how you do it, Mr. Manufacturer, be smart enough, be innovative enough, look with your engineers and make sure that you comply with it. And that is, I think, then a sound playing field in which we can operate, all of us. And it really creates continuous technical and technological progress, and I really think that's the way forward, without capping innovation.
Mr. Palomares, talking about regulation, your efforts to bring shipping into a carbon dioxide regulatory system. There was much discussion yesterday about the lacuna of shipping and aviation in terms of cap-and-trade systems. How do you bring shipping in, and can it be done on a regional, or must it be done on an international basis?
Addressing the first part of your question first, the Kyoto Protocol in Article 2.2 earmarks bunker fuels burned by shipping and also fuel burned by aviation. The regulation of these emissions from these fuels to be dealt with by IMO and ICAO, respectively. IMO has taken up the challenge, and now we have voluntary guidelines in place. We have had for some time now, and now, as I said at the beginning, we are embarking on a global regime. IMO doesn't work on regional basis. All the regulations are global, with very, very specific exceptions, such as emission control areas. But those have to be agreed globally so that the international character of shipping is respected at all times. Now, the intention of IMO is to continue dealing with emissions from shipping within IMO. It is acceptable that the UNFCCC regime acts as a framework convention in a very similar manner as the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea acts also as an umbrella or framework convention for the other myriad of obligations that fall upon IMO to regulate. And these are maritime safety, maritime security, and of course all other aspects of marine pollution prevention and control. So the regime that is under development at the moment will be global in nature, and the intention will be to have the UNFCCC parties in Copenhagen next year to agree to leave IMO to continue regulating shipping as it has been doing for the past 50 years.
And will you have enforceability difficulties arising out of that?
Well, IMO, like any other UN specialized agency, doesn't have enforcing powers. The usual way that conventions are put together is they contain regulations applicable to ships, and then the flag state is responsible for implementing the regulations. Of course, we have a second layer that guarantees compliance or largely guarantees compliance, which is port state control. And that is the ability of a port state to make sure that ships that come into their ports comply fully with all the regulations in the 43 conventions of IMO that are currently in force.
I'd like to move from enforceability to a related issue, transparency, and ask Mr. Roga, to what extent are you seeing pressure within your industries for greater transparency in regard to sustainability accounting?
Well, this is a must, and this is a future development. We saw today a presentation of the commitment of DHL, one of our members. I like to see also such an engagement by medium-sized companies, but how to achieve this? We are pushed by some of the trade and the industrial companies in presenting also a carbon footprint over the activities we are doing, because these companies on the industrial and the trade side like to see it also in a global way, including their suppliers, and we are also a supplier. But if we like to introduce this, this is not so easy, and therefore we need also some support, maybe by scientific, by universities and so on, how to develop this also adapted to medium-sized companies, that they can also use this and present this also, if required, to their customers. And this is also a good measurement to control the activities in your own company. And a freight forwarding company has not only transport engagements in the different ways I presented, but one of our main tasks is also warehousing. And what we can do in the warehousing side, we can improve the energy consumption in the warehouses, what we are doing actually under the pressure of the prices, of course. But we can also produce energy on the roofs of our warehousing, what more and more of our members doing also actually. These are also possibilities we can improve also in the next years. And these possibilities also on the warehousing side, we have to take into consideration when we speak about carbon footprint.
Yes, this is a very interesting question to know how a sector can organize itself to take commitments. Because, of course, obviously there is a need for common views, that it is interesting for the sector to promote its progress according to the market and other considerations. So first, you need to federate your members and to know whether this is a major issue for them individually and for them collectively. After that, you have to do a very difficult job, which is collecting a database, which is not the most interesting and easy thing, but you can't do anything without a database in order to bring together the actors of the sectors, and each of them can compare its performance to the average one or to some others if they agree to share that. And obviously you need also to have cooperation with neutral independent bodies. This can be universities. We do in the rail sector with universities, but we also do with the European Environment Agency for business in Europe, which is absolutely necessary because otherwise anyone can say what he wants. And we need this loop of control of what we say. And after that, you can say, yes, we take some commitment, and of course you can prove it. But this is a long time process, and this is not... but after that, I feel also that independently for the companies, for their business, they can bring their performance as one of their assets, in addition to first reliability, of course.
Mr. van der Straten, are we actually seeing management in, for instance, auto manufacturing companies beginning to use sustainability reporting as a tool in decision-making?
Well, sustainability reporting or environmental reporting is nothing new within the auto industry. All manufacturers do that since many, many years already, and you can see from all major manufacturers, without bringing any names, they issue that every year, a sustainability report. That is, I think, an excellent tool in terms of transparency and really showing to the public what we are doing. And I'll be very honest, we don't have a guilty conscience about what we are doing. I really think we are doing the right things. It is, as I said, a good tool. Now, of course, it also raises the question, what is sustainability? And we have seen quite some debate over the last few days talking about biofuels, for instance, the need to develop standards to ensure the sustainability of the manufacturing and use of biofuels. And for that, and that is anyway, be it biofuels or any fuel, I think the same logic should apply. And there definitely you really need to apply a well-to-wheel approach, namely the whole sustainability from the well, the production of your fuel, the extraction, etc., up to the tank of the vehicle, and then from the tank of the vehicle up to the wheels, or the propeller in for a ship or whatever. This whole chain needs to be seen, and I think in there is still some work to do in order to ensure that clear, harmonized policies and standards are set for the to really calculate, if I can say, or define the sustainability of fuels.
Thank you very much. We would like to begin taking questions now from the audience. I'm going to put one question to Susan Pikralidas while the hands go up. So please, if you have a question or a comment focused, if you would please, directed to one of the panel members. Raise your hand. Here we have one, and I'll just ask Susan to briefly tell us if you think that transparency and labeling would really make a difference in consumer behavior. And I'm thinking of a remark made yesterday by the Swiss minister who said housewives in Switzerland are still driving big armored Hummers to do their shopping. I wonder whether it would make any difference at all whether those Hummers were sold with carbon footprint labels.
Well, again, I can't get into the mind of a consumer, but we do think FIA does believe very much in transparency to consumers, because at the very least you want an informed consumer. What they do with the information is hard to predict, but you do want an informed consumer. And along those lines, in terms of my friend Mr. Venderstraten, we think that car buyers shouldn't have to rely just on what manufacturers say. That's not to suggest that they're saying untrue things, but we think that there should be an objective, credible source that consumers can rely on. And so the FIA Foundation actually has been funding for 5 years something called EcoTest. And the ADAC Club in Germany has been managing the EcoTest. And what it does is it tests cars further than the EU tests go. It actually tests also under real-world driving conditions and with such features as air conditioning. And the EcoTest has been reporting for 5 years cars that are, they give them star ratings in terms of their environmental rating, their eco rating. And there's been a lot of interest in this. I mean, the FI clubs that have been involved in it have advertised that in their club magazines. We've tried to make consumers as aware of it as we can. And so we hope that we will be, through EcoTest, be adding to the education of a consumer so that we have an informed consumer that we hope would stop buying SUVs, no harm intended, but make a more informed decision on their cars. So yes, long answer to your question. We do think transparency is very important.
Thank you. We have a question here, I believe. Please say who you are and what organization.
Right. Paul Nieuwenhuis from the Centre for Automotive Industry Research at Cardiff Business School in the UK. Now, automotive, so addressed really to the automotive members. We've heard a lot of talk about costs in recent days, and I think that's something we need to unravel a bit. When you think of what the costs are in the automotive sector, a lot of that translates into engineering resources, hiring more engineers, creating more IPR. The automotive industry spends between 60 and 80% of its costs with suppliers. So again, that's cost transferred to suppliers who hire more engineers, create more IPR. If you think, for example, of the introduction of the three-way catalytic converter in the 1980s and early 90s, the car industry regarded this as a cost. However, if you talk to companies like Johnson Matthey or Engelhardt, they see it as a great benefit. So if you're sitting here as a politician, perhaps you should look at this wider redistribution of resources and the benefits it creates in terms of IPR and higher technology content for your cars generally, which at some stage you can then translate into customer benefits for which you can charge money. So perhaps the cost picture is being too narrowly defined. Can you comment on that?
That's quite an interesting question. The issue of costs is indeed a little bit complicated, but at the same time very simple. I think what needs to be seen is not only the cost for the manufacturer or the cost for the supplier or the benefit of the supplier or the benefit of the manufacturer, is really the cost that the consumer finally will have to pay for his new vehicle or new bicycle or whatever. And in there, as long as the cost increases, if I may use that word, are sustainable, I see no big problem for the time being. What I'm afraid of is that looking at the aging car fleet all over the world, including in developed markets, even in Germany, the car fleet is aging nowadays in such a developed country. And there comes a peak. We have also talked about peak oil, etc. I think we can also talk about a peak cost, at which time consumers will really think twice before replacing their old 25-year-old junk, which is polluting a lot and which is inherently unsafe. They will think twice before replacing that by a new, more efficient, safer vehicle. So this is really where you need to strike a balance between how far do we want to go without creating negative effects that we simply overlooked when making the policy decision.
Thank you. The gentleman in the...
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Marco Sorgetti. I'm the director of CLECAT. We are freight forwarders and logistic enterprises at European level. Mr. Rogge is our Secretary General, so I'm very pleased to be here. I have to first of all congratulate the organization of this meeting, and everything has been wonderful. There was a statement that the director of this building made yesterday in a private conversation that actually captured my imagination and triggers a question to two of your eminent panelists there. And it's connected with our ability to capture the signals of change. He said that his kids are now suggesting that they are embarrassed to be driven to school in an SUV vehicle, whereas 2 years ago, and they were very proud. And they asked him to change the vehicle because they don't like to go to school in that vehicle. So that's an important sign of change, in my opinion. And the question is, what can our structures, what kind of strategies can our structures enact to capture these signals of change? And notably, I have an example. In the rail market, there was an important sign of change in 1991 when, of course, it was decided after a 5 or even more period of discussion that was going back into the 80s that the market should be realized. And this was such an important signal of change that I think it has been extremely short-sighted not to capture. Despite this, the rail structure has taken 17 years to absorb this important signal of change. So if we want to capture these signals, we have to be more alert, and we have to do it much quicker, both on the market and on the policy. And I think that this is a point we have to introduce in our policy making if we want to live for the word of tomorrow instead of the word of yesterday. Thank you.
So let's pass that right on to Monsieur Alliadier, and perhaps a comment from Susan too, briefly, if you would, please. And may we have the microphone in the front row for Julia King, please?
Yeah, sure that it takes some time to move from a monopolistic and state-owned world in Europe to an open market and competition. Yes, I agree with you. But on the sign of changes, I used to be some years ago the director for environment in, I can say, SNCF in France. And I was very interested in knowing whether this sign of change could be used for market action, especially for passengers. And my colleague in charge of the passenger business, CGV, high-speed business, was very skeptical when I spoke to her in this field. And I organized a small survey, very cheap, with some students during the holidays to know if in France, let us say 6 years ago, there were some signs that we could really build some part of our marketing strategy on this issue, sign of change, and the need for something else than consuming anything. And I have to say that 6 years ago I was very disappointed, because the result that was that finally most French people were not so interested in such change signs, but rather than by efficiency, price, and so on. And just 2 parts of the French population seems to be a little bit more interested. The oldest one having time to react and less stress, certainly, and the young one. So probably you're right, but the problem is when. And I'm sure that it's today. But probably it's coming. But I have to say that this is very uncertain.
Thank you. Susan?
I thought the comment this morning about reading market signals, in particular in terms of market signals to consumers, was very appropriate. However, I think the problem is that consumers don't know which market signals to trust when they get them, and they're getting somewhat cynical about market signals. To kind of explain, I'll use what I call the Wanda test. Wanda is my mother, and she lives in Iowa. And she's very well read, she's very intelligent, she keeps up with everything, she's curious, she wants to know what's going on in the world, about everything. And her first question to me would typically be, why aren't we doing something about the oil companies taking all this money and raising up our oil prices? There's no shortage. And that's not because she doesn't want to believe that there's a shortage. She just doesn't know. There is nothing out there in a way that would inform a typical consumer about what we all know here, what we've learned here, and what we all came into this forum knowing, that there is in fact going to be more expensive energy, less energy, that we are facing a carbon problem. They hear about it at a very high, abstract, thin level. They don't know the reasons behind it. They don't know why they should believe that. And so I think in terms of a market signal to consumers, we're faced with the fact that they aren't informed enough to get the market signal. And I don't think we've done a very good job of giving them that information in a way that they can understand, and more important, in a way that they believe.
Julia? More questions? If you have a question, raise your hand so the microphones can get to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia King from Aston University in the UK. I had a question for Susan about the other aspects of what the FIA does, because I don't think we're going to sell this low CO2 world to people in the developed countries without reassuring them it still has some fun in it. And I happen to think motorsport is fun, despite that perhaps I shouldn't admit that. And I think the FIA has a real opportunity to raise the public profile of CO2 reduction technologies through motorsport, and indeed through indeed the introduction of new technologies as well, through the kind of regulations that it applies to motorsport, the kind of restrictions on fuel that can be consumed in a race and things like that. And I thought it would be interesting to hear, does the FIA have sort of ambitious plans to keep driving that agenda forward, and can we encourage the FIA to make them even more ambitious?
The answer is yes and yes. As you may know, we have what we call our Make Cars Green campaign. It's going to be officially launched on June 5th in New Zealand, but we've sort of soft-launched it already. And what we've done that in two ways. Our motoring clubs are using the materials and launching the Make Cars Green campaign in their own way, but we've also gotten a lot of the motorsport side to endorse it. We've had various teams speak out on behalf of it. We've had race car drivers speak out in support of the Make Cars Green. And so we are using what I think is a very good leverage to try to integrate the motorsport, which is very popular worldwide, with the message that we're trying to get across in terms of public policy. And we will continue to do that. We're looking to use motorsport more effectively in terms of public policy, just as you said. The other thing is that, yeah, there are a lot of technological advances that come from motorsport. A lot of what we see in our cars today originated in motorsport. One thing that's, just to kind of answer your question, that's kind of interesting right now is I don't know if it's this year or next year, but they're using a system called KERS, K-E-R-S. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but essentially what it is intended to do is use the residual power from braking and reuse it in the propulsion. You might know more than I do. But it's a way of saving energy, or reusing energy, more effectively using energy. And it is probably adaptable, I would suggest, relatively soon in the automobile industry. The problem, again, would be time lengths, costs, those types of hurdles. But anything in the motorsport world does take time to get into the automobile, the consumer market. But it does test out new things, and it is looking. The whole motorsport area is looking for ways to be more environmentally sustainable. I think just this year they went to non-leaded fuels for the first time. So, long answer to your question, but the answer is yes and yes. We intend to work more closely with motorsport to use the leverage there, and to continue to work to encourage the transfer of those technologies to the consumer market.
I'm looking forward to seeing electric cars racing down the streets of Monaco. We had a question.
You already see diesels in competition, which was unthinkable just 2 or 3 years ago.
We have a question here.
Thank you, Chairwoman. My name is Hügel from the International Road Transport Union, IRU, the organization which represents the transport operators of trucks, coaches, and taxis worldwide. Now, first of all, I would like to thank the ITF for the organization of this Congress. Talking about the Congress, do you know that everything in this room, apart from us human being, has been on a truck? And to have this coffee outside, you need 29 companies from 18 countries to have that coffee out of sight, and most of them are truck operators. Now, I think what I'm saying is there is a link between transport and trade, and I'm very happy that this was reflected on the panel as well, and that the key is to reduce the environmental impact of road transport. Our answer is can be captured in 3 words: innovation, incentives, and infrastructure. I was also very happy to hear that the Dutch minister elaborated on that yesterday as well. Innovative at-source measures are the best to reduce environmental impact. Governments need to provide real business incentives, and adequate infrastructure is a sine qua non. Mr. van der Straten, to elaborate on your example on the congestion bill in the States, if you would solve the congestion bill in the States, you would need the Kyoto Protocol. If you solve the congestion bill in the States, you don't need the Kyoto Protocol. That was what I'm saying. It's a little bit provocative, but that's a fact. Now, my concerns to the panelists. We were talking about cost-effectiveness measures for road transport. Wouldn't it be better to talk about cost-benefit analysis of the measures? And I'm giving an example, which dwells on the example by Mr. Rogge. Railway can be environmentally friendly, but we should look at the quality and the reliability as well. It's not so simple to just look at the environmental performance of a mode. The second question, this actually goes to the distinguished delegate from Germany here in the room. 2 or 3 years we were promoting first-generation biofuels. Now we're a bit more skeptical. Now we're in promoting second-generation biofuels. And we don't know yet the life cycle analysis of it. We don't know what's the CO2 balance of it. But we still have a mandatory mix of biofuels, for example, in Germany. Is that the right way? Shouldn't we wait and follow the initiative of the special envoy to Ban Ki-moon, who said, let's have a moratorium on the production of biofuels for the moment until we know what's happening. My last concern is also for the panelists to share with you, what do we do with the suitability of pricing? And I'm going to be a bit provocative there as well. We know infrastructure charges and fuel taxes will not be earmarked. They will not go back to the industry to solve the problem on site. So you could be a little provocative and say, polluter pays, problem stays. Now my last concern is, and that goes to Mr. Mandil, you said earlier today, high oil prices are very good and helpful. Please don't tell that taxi driver bringing you to the airport today. Thank you.
Mr. van der Straten, would you like to comment?
Well, then we would go on for another 2 hours, I'm afraid. But basically, certainly one issue mentioning we wouldn't need a Kyoto Protocol. I understand we are here at the International Transport Forum. I take, by the way, the opportunity to signal the publication of our little brochure, which is also available outside, which lays down much of what I have been saying already. But let's face it, in terms of figures, the share of transport and transport in general, and these are IPCC figures, account for 18.5% of the global man-made CO2. Road transport out of these 18.5% is about 86%, so resulting in less than 16% globally. What does it mean? Is that if we want to really tackle the climate change and CO2 question, it's not sufficient to address transport only. Definitely much more will need to be done. This is only a tiny little aspect of the global problem that we are faced with. The other comments raised about the sustainability of the biofuels, that's exactly, I don't think we need to wait, because definitely we as manufacturers, unfortunately, we are faced with some very short-term targets and requirements, certainly in Europe. But it really comes back to what Mr. Mandel said this morning, what I said as well. We as manufacturers, we need to know from the start that we are doing the right thing, and I don't want us to be driven by policy in one particular direction, and then the next year they say, oh, no, don't do that because you are doing something totally wrong. And then we have to start all over again, and in the end we will never get any result. And last but not least, just a final little comment on the question of the SUV to drive the children at school. That's again an example of what I said. Look at the performance, not at the technology. It may well be that this big SUV is more efficient than another car on the road. So don't simply look at the vehicle in itself. Some of them can be quite efficient.
And if I may add something about access charge to infrastructure, I think we have in Europe a very interesting political debate on this issue with the discussion around the Eurovignette directive proposal from the Commission. And I hope that all the actors on this panel are in agreement to say that we trust the politics to take the wise and good decisions on this issue. And it's why we need you. Each of us makes its own lobby, its own influencing, but at the end of the day, the answer is in the hands of the politics, and I think it's wise and democratic.
So to intervene, but I fully share the comment made by the representatives of the IRU, and we have a long experience in this. We gain a lot of money coming out of taxes and road tolls and so on, and we run every day in more congested areas. Yeah? We collect the money, we optimize the congestion, we optimize the revenue of the ministers of finance, and nothing will change. Yeah? And this is the outcome. And therefore, to the representatives of the UEC, I'm not supporting this discussion concerning internalization of external costs, when this only leads to this effect that we have even to pay more, and the service we get for this will even be poorer. And this is the outcome, and this is what we are faced with. And one of the most important measures to overcome the situation of pollution and energy consumption is, beside the technological development, to avoid these congested areas we are faced with in all the main countries in Europe and abroad.
We have a comment or a question in the middle row, yeah?
Thank you. Nick Rogers, motorcycles, basically. I was delighted to hear that someone else has a mother who terrifies her. I actually spend quite a long time preparing for my mother's visits because she always comes with a long list of questions. While you're here, dear, could you just explain? And it's one of the more traumatic weeks of my year. But I think what's interesting about the conference is that we all know a lot about everything about this subject, most of us. And we're talking amongst the people who know a lot about everything. But actually, I don't think they're the people who need to know. I think it's the people like my mother and all the rest of us, all of the others, who have to be persuaded that this is a good thing. Now, yesterday over lunch, I gave Yves van der Straten a clear suggestion about what he and his organisation should do, and I repeated the same thing to the FIA Foundation, because they're the one with the money, and I'm looking forward to seeing which of them comes up with the goods first. But that's just between us. My question, or rather comment to the panel is, it seems listening to all of this, it's very like the problem of trying to stop people smoking. They're all addicted to it, they all want to do it, they all agree they ought to stop, but actually they don't. And I'm just thinking that maybe to do this work and to get the message out, we should be talking to people like those who've run the campaigns of anti-smoking and so on, because they have had to get this kind of unpopular message across. And I just like the panel's comments on that. They don't have to take a long time. Thank you.
We volunteered, Mr. Roga.
Well, I stopped smoking some 20 years ago. And I think I made clear whatever we can do in optimizing the logistic chain, we will do under cost pressure actually. And we will do this today and tomorrow further. We will use the highest standard of technology standard. Our investment circles are for the trucks 3 or 4 years. And therefore we always use the highest standard we can get. And well, if we improve our operation on the rail with 10% per year, this is not a bad performance, and this we did in the last years. Therefore, there is a lot to do, but we need also a better understanding, not only in our industry, but also with industry and trade, because sometimes I hear the spokesman of the big industrial companies and the trade companies speaking about logistics and what we can achieve in interconnecting by information technologies, everything, but coming out to the daily business then, or coming back to the daily business, what we are faced with, towards these companies, we have waiting times at their plants of 6-7 hours. Information was there, but the slot is not available. Or coming out to the shops in congested areas in Germany or in other parts of Europe, we can only deliver with one light truck 7-8 shops in the morning because we have a time slot to respect, and the trading companies are not prepared to open up their shops earlier that we can deliver our goods also at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning or at night. This is also possible. They start as a business at 10 o'clock and saying, well, we have no staff available. Sorry, you have to organize yourself. And then we have to run with 2 or 3 trucks to the cities to deliver what we can also do with one truck. This is also some part of the story to have a better information, a better understanding, and we can do a lot together if we really will.
Susan, brief comment?
Two just very brief comments to that. The smoking campaign, and I think other health campaigns have been based on what's called the health belief model. And it's technical, but in essence what it is you scare people enough to get them to change, but not so much that they think it doesn't make any difference that they should change, that there's just no hope. So a lot of those campaigns have been built in that model, and perhaps it's something that could be used here. The second point is I think in this day of new and alternate media, I don't know that we've made as much use of all the various ways of reaching people that are out there now. I mean, you can target people and you can hit almost everybody in one way or another through various media. So I think that's something else that we could look at.
If I may, just a last thing. Knowing Nick Rogers since too many years probably, it's simply again a proof of his good common sense. But that's basically also inherent in what we are promoting, this integrated approach, is that whatever we do, it will not work if it does not involve the consumers one way or another. And that is, I think, for me, a key point, is to spread the message out of these expert circles. Because, as you said, virtually everybody here knows what we are talking about. But it is not us who are going to change things, it's the consumer.
So another job for ministers as well to get the information out to citizens. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
My name is Steve Akerst. I'm with Natural Resources Canada. And I'd like to thank my former gentleman here for setting up my question. We know that the auto industry, as an example, spends hundreds of millions of euros a year in advertising their product. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that advertising tends to focus on performance, luxury, features. I'm wondering if the industry has really made a commitment to get the messages out around fuel efficiency, around eco-driving, perhaps around some of the technology and features that they're putting in their new vehicles to make them more fuel efficient. Because certainly in North America, we really haven't seen a lot of that type of advertising. And it comes back that there are many ways to get that message out to the consumer, and I'm wondering if the industry is prepared to commit to make more of an effort in doing that.
Mr. van der Straten.
Well, I guess I'll have to be the one to respond to that, unfortunately. No, this being said, I think really the issue is a little bit newer in the United States than it is in other countries. This being said, I think the movement is starting there as well, and there are in various countries worldwide, certainly in Europe, there are commitments in place to ban advertising on power, speed, etc., and to really promote eco-driving. As a matter of fact, that was mentioned in the last, I think the day before yesterday. Many manufacturers already offer for free, whenever as a customer you enter their dealership to order a new vehicle, they offer eco-training driving course. So there is a lot on that already going on. It needs to be further promoted, to be accelerated, that's for sure, but I can tell you we are doing a great deal about that already.
We are coming to the end of our stake. Okay, we'll take this as our last question then, in the second row, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Romain Hubert. I'm coming from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I wanted to come back what Mr. van der Straten mentioned some time ago, that it is not, global warming is not only a transport issue, and I wanted to explore a little bit that further on. We heard that transport transport CO2 emissions, we have solutions on the technical, on the new technologies. We have solutions for policy issues, for the behavior of the consumers and so on. From the technology basis, we heard that we will have an improvement of the combustion engines in a first step, in a second step the plug-in hybrid vehicles, and in 20 years' time electrical vehicles. So we will have a decoupling from the transport CO2 emissions from the carbon fossil fuels. Now, if we have this big increase in, we are doing a huge effort to have this shifting from fossil fuels to electricity. Now, my question is, where is this electricity coming from? Do we know? I think we have to do a message from the transport to the policymakers for the strategy of future electricity generation, that there will be a huge increase of electricity in 20 years' time, and that they have to be prepared to have a sustainable electricity generation too. Thank you.
Do we have someone on our panel who would like to comment on that, or do we have anybody from the utilities in the audience?
No, but it's certainly an issue for a full Congress, because this is really an issue, but I don't think we have time to do seriously some debate on this issue. This is, and as you know, railways consume a lot of electricity, and this is a concern for us to know how this policy is to move, but I don't think we could give a quick answer. But
it basically also is again what I called the well-to-wheel approach, really looking at the whole fuel chain from the extraction, production, up to the actual use. It makes no use to really displace the problem to another sector. The whole issue must be looked at from the beginning to the end, but that's quite a debate indeed.
The famous holistic approach. We have a comment here from the gentleman.
I would like to add something about the electricity consumption. Now, I'm a man of the future. I'm 25 years ahead of the time because I drive since 5 years electric vehicle.
Just tell us your name, please, and your organization.
My name is Roland Reichel. I'm from the honorary chairman of the German Solar Mobility Association. And I'm driving since more than 5 years or 6 years on all my small mobility and electric vehicles, so I know how much it consumes. I measure it. It is 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Recently, I got a second car, Berlingo Electric, which has an energy consumption of 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Now, I calculated if all 40 million cars in Germany would be electric, how much energy do we need on that basis, on 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and on the basis of 10,000 kilometers each, which is the average of the German vehicles. And it would be something in the range of 60 to 70,000 gigawatt hours, which is exactly the amount of energy we had last year in the grid from renewable sources, which is 14%. So it is not a huge amount. It is possible. It is very much possible. And never I heard here about the new idea of vehicle to grid, which is a model when we have lots of solar and wind power in the grid might become unstable because the energy is there when the wind blows or when the sun shines. So we add 1 million or 2 million or 3 million electric vehicles, and we have something like a pumped storage device, which now is made with small lakes and so on. But with electric vehicles, it is even cheaper and gives us, for the same amount of money, more storage. So with electric vehicles, 1 million, 2 million, 40 million, we can stabilize the grid, we can take renewable power from wind and solar sources, and we can save money.
That's a very nice, optimistic note to end this stakeholder session on. So let's wrap it up right there and say thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you as well to our audience for those very interesting, substantive submissions. And I am going to ask Jack now to return to the stage to begin winding up our proceedings. And I thank you very much for your attention. It's been a very interesting 2 days. Goodbye.
Well done, Melinda. Well, first, thanks very much to Melinda. She has become an expert in transport very quickly, you will agree. I think what it does show is a very professional approach to preparation, which is very well disguised. So congratulations and thank you, Melinda. We're just coming to the end now, and I just want to say how enjoyable it has been for us all here to have so many of you present. It has been a kind of a roller coaster adventure for us and the staff and for our member countries as we have gone from being a rather closed organisation to being one that's trying to be open to the influences of policy from outside the ministry. So it's been a really exciting adventure for us all. We had a lot of uncertainty about how this would go, and we were of course nervous about everything. But I must say we've had a lot of positive feedback from you, from many people, and I'd like to thank you for that. And I see that as a very positive sign to build on for the future. And of course we will review carefully everything that happened here, and we want feedback from you all on things that maybe we could have done better and things that maybe we can improve. But we feel in general that we've had a very enjoyable time. We've got a lot of positive reactions from you, and we thank you for that very much. It makes the staff and everybody, feel as if we have done something worthwhile. So now, what happens now? Well, we will, as the President said earlier on, try to put together a lot of the information that we have received here, and we have also developed a lot of new communications techniques. So if you happen to go on our website already today or yesterday, you will have seen already a lot of the material from Wednesday. And if you go today, you'll have seen a lot of the material from yesterday. So we are trying to do some of these communication things that are spoken of to try and make this material available to a broad public as quickly as possible. And so that's, one of the things we are trying to do in this reform. I mean, it was very important for us to have Mrs. Merkel here. It was a great sign of support for our new venture. And Mrs. Merkel, when we were leaving, I said, we're very grateful for you coming. And she said, I was delighted to come. So I immediately said, well, will you come back next year? So she's too clever to fall for that, of course. But I'm sure that we will have some good people next year as well. And I think it's something to build on. And we will work very hard to get the right kind of people here. And of course, all of you can help us to do that, the member countries, but also industry, to get your top people here. Now, we think there have been useful outcomes and outputs. I mean, part of it is the exchange of ideas, and part of it is an agenda moving forward. But I think you will find that there is substance in what the ministers have agreed. And I think it's not trivial, because we had a lot of countries, from the richest to the poorest, together, and what they agreed was quite a strong agenda for going forward. And it does include the strong wish to speak of decarbonising the transport sector. So if industry needs a signal, there it is. Now, do they take it seriously? Well, that's another matter. But I think it's there. So 120 grams, that's just a start, I suppose. So, industry has a signal that we want to move towards a decarbonised economy. Now, it's not easy. That's why we want you all to help. So I think there are a lot of follow-up things to do. We were also very pleased to have a very strong research component here. We have, for many years, very strong contacts with research, and the people we had here, I think, were excellent, and we're delighted with their strong involvement and positive participation, and we hope that will continue, and that they will see their work also feeding into policy makers' thinking and decisions, and that's really something very important. I'd just like to say a few thank yous to finish. I'd like to thank all our local contractors, and especially CCL and their team. They have been fantastic, and they have all the staff of the conference centre and all the staff around the town. The support from Leipzig itself has been great, and from the mayor down through all the staff who have helped, and the people who I hope have made you feel welcome here. All of those have done a great job, and thanks very much to them. I'd like to thank, of course, Germany as the host country for having helped us along the way and been very actively involved in all our preparations. And we're very grateful for that, for their support. We'll be looking for a larger budgetary contribution, of course, but nevertheless, that's one thing we have to work within. And I think we have found very good combinations of working together on that. I would, if you will excuse me saying it, say a thank you to my staff, because they have worked extremely hard to prepare this in a quite stressful environment, because it's so many new things for us. And I just want to put on record how grateful I am for all the support I have got from all my staff. They have really worked well beyond what was needed for this. And just to finish then, I'd like to thank Finland, because Finland has chaired the organisation over the last year, and it has been a pleasure to work with you, Minister, and with your team. You have always been very helpful, supportive and good-humoured, so it's been a pleasure to work with you, and perhaps you would say the closing words on behalf of the Presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to close our forum meeting. I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of you all in saying that these 3 days have been most interesting and stimulating. We have heard many excellent presentations and had intensive debates on this very topical subject. We have all certainly learned a lot. And we all have many things to take with us back home. It is, of course, essential that we keep the dialogue alive and work closely together also in future. In a complex issue like fighting climate change, we need to put all our efforts together. We need still more information, close cooperation and open exchange of views between all actors. It has been a pleasure to see such a high level attendance and so many participants. It's very important that already this first meeting of the Forum was able to attract so much interest. I would like to thank you all very warmly for your active participation and kind cooperation in all the events of the Forum. I would also like, once again, to thank the ITF Secretariat and the Secretary General for all their good work. They are the backbone of the success for the Forum. And of course, the German organisers and our host in Leipzig deserve our warm thanks for the great setting they have provided us. For Finland, it has been a privilege to hold the first Forum presidency. It has also been a challenging and exciting time to lead this new Forum through its first year. There have been some growing pains, but there are great new opportunities ahead of us. It is now possible to conclude that this has been a very successful meeting. The International Transport Forum has really proved its usefulness. In this respect, I am confident that the good atmosphere and positive spirit that we have all together managed to create will guarantee that the future meeting of the Forum can benefit from this heritage. With these words, I want to conclude this meeting and wish all the best to the new presidency, Turkey, on the way to the next year's Forum meeting. See you all in Leipzig on 27 to 29 May 2009. I wish you a safe journey back home. Thank you.